personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, Danyetta Fleming. She is the CEO of Covenant Security Solutions Limited. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we met. Oh, this is so funny. So you're in the U.S., you're in on the East Coast, I'm in Chicago, and we actually met because we were on a panel for, I think it was Women in Cyber in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, yes.
Yeah, isn't that funny? And I thought,
around the world.
How do I not know this Black woman in the U.S.? So after we did our session, I was like, oh yeah, we have to chat and meet and do stuff. So I'm happy that you're on this show. You have such great insights and such great energy. And I was just really mad at myself. I'm like, how do I not know her? This is outrageous. So.
it was the time, right?
Yeah, it was.
And there's a lot of little rabbit holes in this community too. So it's sometimes difficult for all of us to connect, but I'm so glad we connected through the Middle East.
Yeah.
Now we're here able to chat here in the US.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Well, tell me a bit about your background. You have really deep experience in cyber, and also it fascinates me, entrepreneurs like me, right? People you've been doing it much longer. Just love to hear kind of your journey in your career.
Yeah, I like to say I got into this through serendipity. I initially got sent a job announcement from the Department of Army. I didn't understand a word in it. Most people would run the other way, and I said, this is interesting, so let me apply. And because I wasn't prior military or anything, I was literally at the back of the list. But somehow they made it to the back of the list, and I ended up getting a job with Department of Army helping do cybersecurity. At that time, it was called information security. We hadn't come up with the term cyber yet. And, at first I actually hated it. I did not like this field. I was looking to get out of it. And as I started to get more into it and learn more and stuck with it, I really understood how this affects all of our lives. And that at that moment, I knew that this was something that I wanted to stay connected in and continue to do. So when I finished working with the Department of Army, I went on to work with Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a consultancy. It's actually also a global consultancy firm, and worked with them for several years before I decided to strike out on my own. And part of it was just looking at the longevity of the field. I knew as we continue to delve further into the technology age, as we continue to build and create our lives intertwined with the tech, that cybersecurity was going to continue to be a big part of that. And I loved being a part of that conversation. And I love the fact that something's new. Like when I started 20 years ago, I mean, the big deal was a server. Now we're talking AI, we're talking cryptocurrencies. So you always are learning. You're always having to expand yourself and think about, the basic concepts pretty much stay the same, but how do you apply them? And sometimes, as I'm sure we'll get into, it gets trickier as you go along. So that's the nutshell of how I started. It was really all kind of one thing led to another. And I took a chance to go out and step out into this field as an entrepreneur as well.
I love it. You have such kind of clear-headed thoughts, and I like your posts. I've been watching been kind of stalking you on LinkedIn, watching the stuff that you put up. It's really cool.
Awesome.
One thing that you said recently, you kind of throw deep thoughts out there and let people kind of think about it. And you hit the nail on the head with this one. And I've not heard anyone say this, but you posted something that said cybersecurity is about humanity. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about that.
The longer I've been in this field, the more I realize it has really nothing to do with the hacker and the guy in the hoodie. That's the imagery that's put out there. But at the end of the day, cybersecurity is about how we conduct our lives. Actually, the first tagline for my company was securing your way of life. And, there's not an aspect of our lives that technology doesn't touch, whether it's getting your paycheck, whether it's your Social Security benefits, you're in healthcare. Every single thing that we do has technology integrated into it. And so if we can't figure out how to secure and how to manage privacy and our data in a way that actually benefits all of humanity, we're going down a bad path. I don't know if you saw the most recent one I put out. It was a quote from Nelson Mandela talking about how we treat our children is a reflection of who we are as a society. So when you look at things like gaming, and the kids, I had this happen to me personally. I've got 3 kids, and I had one of my sons get out there, and he's online getting access to just ridiculous stuff. But, one of them being porn. And I was just like, my goodness, and when you go back and you look at it, I said, thank goodness I'm a technical person. So I could go online and hunt everything out and shut everything down. But I can't imagine what happens to parents who don't have that capacity and ability. And what's going to happen to our society when you have children that are getting exposed to things that, their minds can't even fully grapple. Like, what am I looking at? What does that mean to me? And what does that mean to the future? And how should I treat other people? How should I treat women? How should I treat men? How should I treat myself if I'm looking at content without a context? So, it's really getting us to think about the technology and have forethought. My mom used to always say to us, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And we don't have that thought when we come to technology at all. We don't think about the humanity aspect of it. It's just that, oh, look, my fridge can talk to me. Well, that's great. But now,
Right.
what does that mean on the flip side? Like, your fridge can talk to you, your phone can talk to you, you got, your home can talk to you. Well, now I can pick up patterns I didn't understand before that can tell me things about you. And what does that mean when we bring in artificial intelligence? What are they going to pick up? Will they know by, what time you wake up in the morning, whether or not you're more susceptible to heart attacks? And is that going to then lead you not to be able to have insurance because
Right.
you're a person who wakes up at, 6:45 instead of 6:30? I mean,
Right.
we don't know.
Right.
We don't know. And we don't think about the human aspects to what we're doing.
Yeah, that's true. And then too, I mean, to me, a lot of companies that are making these technologies, they're obviously they have a profit motive and there's nothing wrong with making money, right? But
Right.
the things that they're doing can be so harmful and detrimental. And right now, it just seems like people are saying, well, as a consumer, it sucks to be you, right? Like, too bad you
Right.
didn't read 90-page privacy policy, or too bad you didn't, have a grasp on how this technology, the downside of this technology. And I feel like that's such a huge, huge gap. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge gap. And I think that what we haven't thought about is what does that mean to us as a society? I remember being at a conference. Actually, we held the conference here in Chicago, I want to say maybe 2014. And we had a gentleman come in from the UK, and he was talking about a retired pensioner who was a teacher. And they went online and got caught up in some sort of like, feed the children type scam kind of thing that was going on. You feed these kids, and the person got a hold of their bank account and wiped them out. And so, and that was such a touching story because the police were like, look, we have no way to know where that money is, right? We know what account it hit when it left yours, but after that, it's spent for all we know. We have no way to trace it. And so there's that aspect where we don't think about, well, this is a person that spent 30 years of their lives trying to build up their next egg, looking to be able to take care of their grandkids and their children and have a nice life. And now they're penniless. And so, as much as we sit back and say, you build it and best of luck, you should have read that, what does that mean when we get 100 or 200 or so pensioners without their livelihood?
Right.
What does that mean when you've got, systems? Even now, one of the things I'm thinking of putting out actually while we're talking, is something for law enforcement, because some
Right.
of them go out and there's people who are swatting them because they don't like what they're doing.
Right.
So and for those who don't know what swatting is, they go out and they basically um, figure out where you live. They take data that's readily available through either your camera, your Ring camera, or some sort of device that you may have, and they target you, and they have other people come to your home. Usually, the police come to your home and create havoc for you, scare you half to death, your family half to death, all over the fact that they don't like you. So, it's getting to the point where that interconnection between what's happening online and what's happening in the real world is narrow. And we can't keep saying, well, didn't you read that privacy policy? Well, yeah, that's nice. But the person who's going to do malicious intent, they don't care what the privacy policy says. Yeah.
Exactly. You posted something else that I want to talk about. This is very timely. So this is about the IRS looking to use this ID Me
Yes.
technology for facial recognition and all this stuff. And so I literally almost went on a rampage about this. I could not believe. I'm like, what are you talking about? I could go 1,000 different directions on this one. So apparently the IRS had this company, a third party company called ID Me, try to, develop the system for the IRS to somehow prevent fraud. So their idea was that people having an IRS account would have to submit to this kind of facial recognition thing, submitting like utility bills on, scanning, doing all types of crazy stuff. And, I don't know. I just let you jump in first before I start. I just couldn't. I was like,
well,
what?
I look at it from two angles, right? Because my way into privacy is through more like cybersecurity engineering, systems engineering. So, I get the problem. The problem is every year they've got probably millions of dollars of money that gets sent to a fraudster who goes in and, steals the identity of a valid taxpayer and takes money. And so the thought behind it is let's go and create a system where we can get more assurance on identity. Reality is that there isn't really a lot of strong controls to protect that information. And if they lose it, which, I can't say, the IRS, I believe, has had stuff lost along with OPM and some others. I've actually personally been involved with some loss of information from the federal government. So, when they lose it, then what happens? And there's a flip side to that conversation. And I think that's where there's this hard part. Now, I know that they're rocking it back. I'm sorry, 1 second. I know that they're walking it back right now, trying to figure out how do you manage identity. And that's been a problem that's been as old as the internet. I mean, I remember going to identity conferences, I don't know, maybe the early like 20 years ago. But there has to be a safe and a humane way to figure that out. And it might be that they go back to, sitting down and having hard copies of returns sent in order before you to get the money. And people may not want that, but that might just be part of the answer. But, getting that type of information and you don't have assurances on how you can protect it, that's a non-starter for me personally.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I know it's like, why boil the ocean? Not every, the majority of returns that happen have no fraud whatsoever. So
Right.
why try to push everybody into the system as if there was some fraud happening with everybody, and that's not the truth. And then, much of the information that they are collecting already exists within the federal government. So if you've ever got an ID from a Department of Motor Vehicles, they have all this information. You know what I'm saying? They have the capability to do this scanning, and when you take your picture for, they do facial recognition. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, why create another bucket of data that you
Right, for
literally
somebody
already
to come
have.
steal.
Right.
This is
Exactly.
another validated bucket, and that's the issue, right? They have all these buckets, and that gets into, one of the aspects I think of data security we never talk about, which is integrity, right? We got all these buckets all over the world, but who knows if that information is valid, still valid, invalid, just dead wrong. No one's going back and doing integrity. And I'm gathering that's what they were trying to do with this ID me, is to then have you take the bucket that they have and say what's true, what's not true, so they can further identity. But we're just not in a place to protect that information and to provide assurances to people. And if it's lost on every US citizen, what happens then? Can that be weaponized
Right.
by
Exactly.
another nation or a hacking group?
Exactly. I don't think 1 year of free credit monitoring is going to help if someone steals your facial recognition or your thumbprint or whatever it is,
Right, right. We'll have to do Minority Report. I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw some of those posts, but I like the quote out of there. That's one of my favorite movies. But, are we going to end up there where, the guy is going out to get his eyeballs changed because that's the way he gets around the biometric sensors?
Right.
Are we going to have a black market for body parts and here you
Right.
can go get plastic surgery so you can change your face because somebody
Right.
stole your face? you
Exactly.
know
I need to watch that movie again. They were pretty accurate about a lot of stuff that came out over 20 years ago. So it's not, this is not sci-fi. People are literally trying this stuff. And if anyone who's ever interested in this crazy biometric stuff, there's a website called Biometric Update, and they do all the news on, who got investment, the stuff that people are trying out. And it's like,
Mhm.
It's scary actually to think about all the stuff that people are trying to do. And it's like, just, like you say, your mom said, just because you can doesn't mean you probably should. So some of these,
Right.
I just look at, just kind of
Right.
concerned. So I think, one thing as being a technologist, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way, I like to see people try to leverage technology to solve
Mhm.
problems, but I don't love everything that people are trying. So to me, part of it is trying to figure out how the things that you're developing really benefit the individual. So I don't really see how this thing that IRS is trying to do really benefits me.
It,
I just don't, I can't even.
ultimately, it doesn't. It was someone put out a requirement and said, this is what we're going to do to try and meet this requirement, which is trying to have a way to have very strong identity controls. And that's been one of the difficulties of the internet from its inception, is that it's an anonymous place, right? I could tell you that I'm Danyetta, and then I could tell you that I'm Sally, and how would you know the difference? There really isn't a very strong mechanism for identity. And so this was someone's attempt to do it without really thinking about the grander implications. What happens if you lose it? What happens then? And what happens if, this information, who's to say that someone couldn't take, a picture of me? Because some of this data, I went actually looked at the system because I'm curious.
Yeah, right.
And they're doing it online. So who's to say I couldn't put up a picture or put my dog in there? Like who's to
Right,
say that you're scanning? They're assuming some honesty in the scanning, right?
right,
Because
absolutely.
it's happening online. I could put my a picture of my great great grandmother in there.
Right,
You
exactly.
know, you just don't know. And so it was. I'm going to give the people the benefit of the doubt. They were trying, just didn't think it through deeply about what the implications were. And
Right,
especially when we're dealing in this world of AI, we don't know what kind of conclusions
right,
these algorithms are coming to. And
right,
especially when, one of the posts I put up from time to time is about in particular for women of color, those AI scanners do not do a good job of recognizing our faces. So what happens then when you're deploying this and I'm a woman of color, do I now not have access to my my social security number and to my tax documents and things like that? So, some of this we're rolling out and it's half baked. It's not taking into consideration anomalies that happen. There was another one where there was a camera system that's rolled out to many police departments, and you're finding people are having to come back and sue the police departments because the camera is saying, I saw you, you were at this incident. There was one actually that happened in Chicago. I think it was Chicago, where an elderly African-American gentleman had given a ride to a young man. That young man, I guess, got out and might have been involved in the shooting, but, the camera saw that man's car. They saw the shooting and it made a correlation that wasn't accurate. He didn't have money to make bail, so he sat in jail until his court date came up, and then they came back and said, well, it's not as accurate as we're claiming. But can you imagine what's going to happen to people across the country as you see people starting to adopt these technologies and not understanding their limitations?
Right. Also, some of these problems that happen, to me, there is no adequate legal redress. You know what I mean? Like, that's not acceptable. You're going to be in jail for a year just till people figure it out. It's like, if this person had the money to be out, or they had the means, or they were, a famous person, they probably don't have to sign and get out on bail, or they have like their lawyer jump on it and do all this stuff. Right. And so, we already have access to justice issues, like, unbelievable access to justice issues. I saw a statistic in Illinois even where they said that, the majority of people who end up in court cases have to be, they represent themselves, right? Yeah. So this is problematic. I mean, I'm not saying, 40%, 30%. I'm like 70, 80, just a ridiculous
and then
number.
You couple that with most people that they have a hard time using their phone. So then to say you're going to use the tech, and then it's a fallacy that keeps getting put out there. Oh, it's the technology, so it can't lie. It can't. Well, you and I both know it's an algorithm that sits behind that technology. And then the data sets that they're using are data sets that are already existing, many of which already come with biases in them. So when they sit down and they say to you, oh, don't worry about it, the tech will never lie. Well, the tech can only do what the tech's told to do. Right. And the people programming it, the people who are executing it, we're making judgments off of it, not really understanding, how this all comes together. How is it coming to its conclusion? And so that's where, it's getting back to that thing you said, that humanity and and cyber, they're intertwined inexplicably.
Yeah. And then too, I feel like I work a lot with people with identity. So I get it, right? So I'm not necessarily slamming this particular company and what they're doing. I just don't like the way they were trying to implement it for the IRS, right? But I think one thing that happens is that, I think when I read about this in particular, the thing that just really got me heated was that they had said they were going to keep the biometric data for 7 years. And it's like, for what? Like what purpose? Once you've identified the person, you don't really need that information anymore, right?
You don't. And what do you do with it? And like I said, it's another thing of people keeping data. We had that big data push. You're probably aware of it, like 4 or 5 years ago. There were really big data everywhere. Couldn't go to a conference without them talking big data. And I try to get people to understand that big data is your data. They make it sound ubiquitous. Oh, but that's your data. And so it's not just the IRS, but I think just companies in general have to start questioning, what's your liability? What happens with that information? How far can you mine it? And again, it gets back to integrity. Is it any good? Because I know a lot of people, and I was saying it with my son, he went online and created all these fake identities. They don't know who in the world he was.
Right, exactly.
He's trying to get around mom's defenses at home. Right. And so So,
Right.
it's like, so you got this database full of what? You don't even know what you have. And
Right.
yet you're going to use it and say, "Oh, well, we've got you." You don't know what you have. I
Right.
can
Exactly.
unequivocally tell you that.
Exactly. So tell me what's happening in the world right now, other than what the IRS is trying to do,
Mhm.
that concerns you about privacy.
Really, I think what we've been talking about, what concerns me is that we have so many nations, um, groups coming up with their own privacy regulations, their privacy laws. And as I said, from my perspective, I come at this really from a systems and engineering perspective. It is near impossible right now for people to keep up with the regs we have. And then we've got more countries and more groups adding their own flavor to it. So what you're finding is that people are basically taking a more legalistic aspect to it of saying, well, we'll just wait till we're caught and we'll save money for the fine. Instead of really kind of taking a holistic perspective and saying, let's really design in the aspects and think about this strategically so that we're protecting information and data. I also, the other thing that I've brought up in the past is I really do think that there has to be some level of ethics or an ethical body or something that basically identifies what we consider to be um, good for the whole and how that should be structured for the whole versus um, allowing that to be made at a individual and corporate level. That's getting back into the types of data that's coming off of some of these sensors. We're saying, the IRS is keeping for 7 years, but I believe that you have to go in and actually delete your information off of like the echoes and some of those places. So I don't even know if they have a limit for how long they keep that data on you. Um, so we're getting to a place where there's, copious amounts of information, but there really aren't any true ethical guidelines about how this should be used. And we're trying to regulate it with the hodgepodge and patchwork that really is different. I think a lot of countries have tried to follow what they're doing with GDPR, but for the most part, each individual jurisdiction has their own view of what privacy means to them and what security means to them, and
Yeah.
that's a tough place to be in.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned something earlier. You said a word that triggered me, and I would love to
Mm-hmm.
talk about this. And the word is context, right? So
Yes.
context matters a lot, right? It
Mm-hmm.
matters because not every use case or every situation should be handled the same way. So you can't, so this is the thing that I have a concern with related to AI. So
Mm-hmm.
AI is a knife that slices both ways, right? So
Right. Right.
maybe it'll do this good thing that you want it to do, but it can also swiftly and mercilessly do this bad thing that you don't want it to do. So it isn't a scalpel, it is a machete,
Right.
literally. What are your thoughts about that?
Um, no, I agree with you. I think we're entering into a place. Well, let's back up a little bit. Part of my concern is that we're entering into this new technology where it is self-learning. Um, and yet we haven't quite figured out what to do with cybersecurity and privacy today. Um, we were overwhelmed and lost before we had the use of AI at the levels we're seeing it and the levels that we're probably looking at over the next 2 to 5 years. So it concerns me gravely because we are letting loose technology for which we don't have a great understanding. We don't even understand what we're doing now, to be honest. We're just throwing up servers and talking about the cloud and have people think you're talking about the cloud in the sky. We're just running, and connecting things and not really understanding what this all means in the end. And that's what concerns me. And you were talking about the lawyers, and if I have any lawyers that come across them, I'm like, look, this is going to be the new field. Go into the cross section of cybersecurity and law, because people are finding, and they're going to continue to find that they're going to have a run-in with a program. And there's not a legal precedence that's set for how do you handle a run-in with a program. Like I was listening the other day, and I think there's companies out there that are using these AI programs to determine whether or not they're using for HR. So say if you're late so many days or you slow down on the production line, then the AI will take note of that, and it'll correlate that information and pull that up to a manager. But people are getting fired because the AI is correlating information that a regular hiring manager may not necessarily have had access to. Or they may not see, they may walk the floor once or twice a day. And, if you're working then they see you working,
Right.
But, now this is correlating information and saying to people that, okay, well, you've gone outside what I consider to be normal. And therefore, we're bringing you up to get let go. Now, I guess the spell safe in it for the companies is that they have a human who goes back and looks at that information. But, they only have one human for every, maybe 200-300 employees. So, those are things that we haven't even begun to think about when we talk about AI. Again, it's that intersection between human and the technology, and where does it end?
Yeah, can't just be all technology. It has to be humans in there somewhere. So, we can't, and this is a thing that literally happened. We can talk about why this is wrong, literally or figuratively. We can't be in the passenger seat, right? We can't let the technology drive us, right? And we've seen people jump into the passenger seat and try to let a car drive them, and it didn't have a good result, right? So from the other, another perspective, the figurative perspective, that's what people are doing. They want the AI to do human things, and the AI doesn't have judgment, right? It doesn't have technology. Data doesn't have context until a human gives it context. Absolutely. It's just collecting information. So I feel like we're abdicating our responsibility to do judgment. And like you say, that's where ethics comes in. That's where judgment comes in. No one should a pilot shouldn't have to wrestle a plane from an AI. That makes no sense.
It makes no sense. But that's where we are. I mean, we're at the point where, and I think, that's why I like your show, and I like what you're doing, because people have to have these questions posed to them so they can start thinking about this as we go forward, because I think we're at that place where we can turn around and start to make some better decisions when it comes to technology. But I think if we don't change course in 2 to 3 years, I mean, we're going to be sitting in a place, we're going to go from Minority Report to Matrix,
right?
The machines are like, hey, you're getting in my way. We're just going to put you in a pod and we'll use you for electricity, So, I mean, I think we're at that nexus point where we can start having these conversations to say, what does it mean to be human? And we built this to really serve us, not the other way around. And when we start abdicating our responsibilities, as you said, and we stop allowing it to have a context, what's the morality? A program doesn't have a morality other than what you program it to have. Right. And who's the arbiter of what that morality looks like? Is it the software engineer that's creating, or the coder? Who's determining that? And that's something that we need to understand and take control of as a society. This isn't just something we leave. I mean, I'm surprised we don't have bodies in, the UN or in places where,
right.
We're still talking about policy, and we're not talking about, well, what's the policy for this technology? I mean, the next pace is the metaverse, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's where we're going to jump to next. So, what's the policy for that? Like what?
Right.
If you're in a 3D format, do the laws of the land apply to you or not?
Yeah, exactly. And to your analogy about going from a Minority Report to the Matrix, the metaverse will probably put us in the Matrix, partially because what's going to happen is that if you don't have a smartphone, if you don't have these devices, the this data will be collected about you regardless, right? And it can be used against you regardless, but you won't have any agency. So you'll basically be food for the metaverse.
Yep. Mentally, emotionally,
Yeah.
and probably eventually physically.
Right.
If we're to believe the Matrix, but I mean, that's where we're headed. And it's such a slippery slope because, there's people like, oh, we don't want to give up all our advances. You don't have to give them up, but you have to think about how they interact with you and how they interact with us as a society. We can't, I mean, we're getting to the point where grocery stores, you don't even need to pull out your wallet. They don't need tellers anymore. You just walk in, it's hooked up to your Amazon account, and you just roll through the store, pick up your groceries and roll out.
Part of this problem, I would love your thoughts on this. To me, part of this problem is that some of the people who are designing this have not experienced problems like this. So they don't know what the downside of this could possibly be because they've never had that. So an example I'll give is like, so let's say you go to a grocery store and it has the mat that you step on and the door opens, right? So every time you step on the mat, you don't even slow down. You just keep walking because you know that this door is going to open for you. But what if someone else behind you steps on the mat and the door doesn't open for them? So you'll say, well, there's not a problem there because when I step in front of the door opens. But you're not thinking about someone, why isn't the door opening for someone else? So it's kind of like this idea, I don't know what you call it, a fallacy or something like that, where you're really not thinking. And part of it, to me, is like, here's another example. When they were doing the COVID passport thing, where they were saying, okay, we're going to create this app and everybody's going to have this app and, they're going to be able to tell who has COVID or whatever. And I'm like, only 45% of people in the world have smartphones. So if you don't have a smartphone, then you can't participate. So a lot of people thought, okay, that was the solution. Let's go to the next thing. It's like, no, let's back up and think about this whole thing to begin with.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It comes down to perspective and creativity. I mean, this was even talked about during 9/11. They were like, well, how come we couldn't see the people that came into play? Well, that's perspective and creativity, right? You didn't understand how other people viewed things and how they could creatively think about using something that you thought for one purpose in another way. And that is probably the crux of the problem with most of the technology we have out here. It's, I'm trying to solve problem X, but I don't think about, well, what happens on Y, A through Z, you just thought about X. You're not thinking about all the possible combinations of how this could be used, how people can get what they want, and understanding how ingenuity works, right? Because, going back to that example of the person stepping on the mat, if you need a credit card to step on the mat for the door to open, then I'm going to figure out how do I get to a credit card so the door can open for me. Right. And that may or may not be, it may be that I clone the person's credit card in front of me. Right. And the system doesn't have a catch to say that, hey, how does this person come in 6 times in a row?
Right. Right. So, exactly. Absolutely.
I mean, and a lot of it, again, gets back to diversity, right? Because we're in a field that's not very diverse. We're in a place where you've got people that are coming in with a perspective that's just their perspective. That's how they would do it. That's how they would access things, but not, it's gender, it's class. And based on how you have that perspective, you have different ways of approaching life. And so a lot of this gets into the reality that we're creating solutions that are for a very, very small group of people. So creating this disparity, even not just with how we handle information, but with how we protect information. People are going to figure out how to live.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially so, I keep beating up on ID.me about this, but
they're one of many.
yeah. It's not really about them. It's just they were just happened to be the ones who had the baton at the time. But this is something I talk about a lot, which is you take a a tool or technology that maybe was used for one type of use, and you try to throw it, especially into like a government use, right?
Right.
Where, instead of, you have less problems if your customer is more curated, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
your customer is everybody, you have to think about you have to have an everybody solution. So you have to have a
Right.
solution that fits for every person, for every scenario. So you can't
Mm-hmm.
assume that everybody has a smartphone, or you can't assume that someone can scan a utility bill and upload it to their computer. Some people barely want to use a cell phone at all. So
Exactly.
I think, trying to, I see this a lot where people say, oh, we have this problem in marketing too. So we have
Mm-hmm.
people, for example, people create a tool, let's say, okay, I want to sell this shirt. I think 80% of these people, if I send them this coupon, they're going to buy this shirt or whatever. And then we're taking the same technology and putting it into systems that profile people for crime.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what do you say? Like, okay, this person's 80%, uh, this 80% likelihood that this is the person that committed this crime. No, it's either 100% or a zero.
Right.
You're either 100% certain or you're not. So it doesn't work that way.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's this is why I like the design side, because you get to ask people those questions, right? And get them to really think through, like, what are you trying to achieve? And oftentimes people look at something, well, I'm just going to put it over here. Well, it doesn't work like that. And what are you going to do with the data? What kind of assurances do you need? And those questions aren't always very clear. And so that's how we end up in this space of, I would say, our cybersecurity nightmare that we keep living over and over and over, which has affected privacy, affected all the different aspects of the intersections of cybersecurity, because we're taking tools and we're saying, okay, well, I can use this shoe to hammer a nail in. Well, you can, but is that the right tool?
Right.
Using the right tool. And what are you going to do the next time, right? If you've got 15 nails, is that what's going to happen to the shoe? So those kind of questions are coming up because everything is about getting speed to market. When you talk about marketing, everyone wants to be out there first. I was actually listening to it was like a podcast, but it's on Clubhouse, and they were talking about health technology and how you have to get things out to market so fast. And I said, well, but there's an ethics to it, right? There's a question about, well, what are you getting out fast, and what harm could that potentially bring to the individuals that could be using your health technology? So, I think we kind of end up in this really weird place that I call um, having a clear plan, having a roadmap of where we're
Right.
trying to go and what we're trying to achieve. And oftentimes we're trying to achieve it without a roadmap. We're just going out and saying, we're going to
Right.
go do this and make it happen and get this technology. And no one wants to build from scratch anymore because it's expensive and long.
Right.
And so we're hodgepodging things together and not understanding the unintended consequences that come with it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about low tech and no tech. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I was on a call, I did a panel recently about privacy in the metaverse. And super smart people on the call, right? And they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, people are concerned, right, about ethics, and they're concerned about, all these technologies and people not understanding it and the potential harm. And
Mm-hmm.
someone, obviously well-intentioned, right, and said something about, well, why don't we build this tech? And it's like, to me, obviously I like technology, but to me, not everything is a technology problem. Like, some things can be done from a human side that don't require technology. So here's an example.
Mm-hmm.
Don't collect certain things. How about that? So don't
Yeah.
even put it in the system to begin with. And then we don't have to worry about how to protect certain things. You know what I mean? To
Right.
begin with. So I think, a lot of us, we get so enamored with this idea that, okay, we're going to buy this tool and then we're good. And it's like, no, like, there's like a human side to that. And there's to me, some of these problems really are human problems that we're trying to have technology solve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and it gets back to asking the question, what are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do this? What are we trying to achieve? And oftentimes people will, when you start asking those questions, then you find out, you know what, well, maybe I didn't really need to have the phone number and the social security number. That was just something that I would like to have, or maybe I really don't need the system to do this, and this, because, but it's getting that discipline back. And that's one of the things that has been lost, because, the longer it takes you to build a system, the more questions you ask, the longer it takes to build, and then the longer it takes to get to market, and the less money you make. Because if somebody else comes up with that same idea, it throws it out onto the market, then that's money, that's revenue share that's lost. There's first mover advantage still plays out. So, from a low tech perspective, I think that we need to really look at that more than anything. I think people get enamored, it's just like the long lines to get the iPhones. I never understood it. I was never that person. I'm like, it's a phone.
No, me either, right?
But, you can't deny that people like tech. They like that idea that I can, push a button and it'll give me what I want, or it'll make things easier. It's lovely to think about the fact that I can go on Uber and they can bring me my food. But, there's some human aspects to it that still need to be thought about. What happens to the individuals that used to perform those services? How can we do that in a way that we bring integrity to some of these systems? Some of them are just connecting people and doing very little background checks or limited background checks. What is it that ultimately makes this service valuable? And those kind of questions that's why you're seeing some of the things fall out, because those questions aren't being asked. I love those apps like anybody else, but I've had my fair share of bad experiences, as well.
That's true. So if it were the world according to Danyetta, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether it be technology, law, human stuff?
Good question. I think what I would want is if we could go back to putting people first, and understanding the basic concept of we are one, that there isn't, and being able to then make decisions from that place of looking out for one another. Because I think that basic question of, how does this affect me? The golden rule, do unto others as you want them to be done unto you. That's missing in tech, very much missing. So I would like that to be, if I had a magic wand, I'd like that to be sort of the underpinning for our regulations, for our system design, and for us to go back and look at the things that we have in place and ask that very critical question.
I love that. We are one. We are one. Yep. I love that. We're not food for the metaverse.
No, we're not. We're not. And if we have our way, maybe we can convince enough people to turn the boat so we don't become food.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for this. This is fantastic. I'm so glad we're able to do this chat. And I think the audience will really love it as well.
Wonderful. Same here. I had a ball. So if you invite me back, I'm more than happy to come back.
Excellent. That'd be great. All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.